So my name is Chris Hanage. I am the General Manager Europe for Papaya. Papaya does a number of different things. The part that I represent is we have an ad network called AppFlood. And before I start, I have a confession to make, and that is, when I start speaking, I tend to speak far too quickly. So if I'm going too quickly and you can't understand me, please will somebody just shout, slow down, okay? Great. Now, before I move on to my next slide, could I have a show of hands for everybody who has taken a game to the West? Nobody. Nobody's, okay, one person in the back, okay? And people who are planning to take a game to the West? Okay, great. Okay, well, that gives me an idea of my audience. Thank you very much. So in terms of the prize for all mobile gaming we know is huge. I was at a conference last week and we were talking about the birth of million-dollar daily revenues, and that the prize is going to be $1, $2, $3, $4 million daily revenues in the next 3 to 5 years. So the prize is absolutely massive. And gaming, as we know, represents a huge part of all the revenues that are out there in the various app stores. And the growth of gaming is accelerating. However, one of the other things that came out of this conference last week is that it's becoming a winner takes all. So it's not like app stores perhaps used to be, where you would have a sort of a mid-market of people making reasonable amounts of money. It's very, very much, if you're the big guys, you can make a fortune, and if you're not, you will make very, very little. And that in itself causes some issues in terms of a go-to-market for the West, because it makes it harder to sort of dip your toe in and try, because dipping your toe in and trying is often code for it not working. There was, again at this event last week, there was a guy who runs a mid-market casual games publisher. There's about 150 of them. They used to be very, very, very profitable on desktop. And he turned around to me and he said, I hate mobile. I hate mobile. He said, because I know what I was doing on desktop and I could make money. And I'm finding it very, very, very hard to make money on mobile. He said, I've got all these people, I'm doing all the right things, and yet it's not working. And so I think making sure you have your plan laid out, making sure you have the right assets and resources in place, and the money to see it through is some of the most important lessons that we can give. In terms of the territories that people look to when they go, when they look to expand, as we say, the West is two of the most important. However, there is a tendency to look at the West as a single unit. So to say, okay, well, the West is app stores, the West is Google stores, and therefore on that basis we can have one strategy for all. The danger of that is even within Europe, where we are, we look at the different territories within Europe as individual identities. So there is a danger that you turn around and say, okay, my strategy for the West, which includes the US, which includes Europe, is X, and I'm going to stick with that. Without actually going down to the nuances of the strategies that you will need for the different territories within, for example, Europe. However, there is a prize, and the prize can be extremely successful for game developers. We've seen IPOs, we've seen guys who have made it work, so it's not as though it's impossible, it just has to be well thought through. So some of the challenges that we face, I've already mentioned in terms of the differences in geography, and I've already mentioned in terms of the fact that there's a tendency to see Europe and see the US as one unit. Partnerships is an area where it's fraught with danger, because there's an issue with trying to find the right sort of people, and then making sure that the right KPIs have been set. Competitiveness, in terms of the sorts of markets that you're looking to go for and the sorts of apps that you're looking to promote, and whether or not there is room for new entrants in that field. Can I have a show of hands for who thinks that free-to-play is the way forward? Okay, anybody thinking of launching a premium game? Nobody. Now, that's really interesting from a competitiveness side, because at the moment, one of the things we're seeing coming out of the West, is that there is some support within app stores for good premium games. Do I think that's going to be the next Clash of Clans? Absolutely not. Is there money to be made in premium? Absolutely yes. And so it really depends what you're trying to achieve and the resources that you have, because again, at this event last week, the mid-market guy who was doing the best was doing it on the basis of premium games. because Apple were quite happy to promote some premium games on their storefront. And so you have to understand, where are you going, how competitive is it, and do you have the resources to actually make a difference? Culture, I mean, the presentation before mine went into a lot in terms of the differences for translation and the differences for the sorts of games that are popular. I'll come more into that in a second. And then the relationships of payment policies, third-party payments, billing, et cetera, Again, it's such a huge topic that it's not something I can particularly cover here. But just to give you examples, be aware of different price points, how price points are translating, bearing in mind currency exchange rates, et cetera. So how do you do it then? How do we actually make this work? Steps to success. First of all, research and strategize. That's very easy words to say. Specifically, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, what are the sorts of revenues that you think you can get or that your competitors are getting from the sort of game that you want to take, you want to bring to the US and the EU? Keyword searching on the app stores for your game name is hugely important, and that also comes under research. You know, you can see a 10 to a 50 times increase in revenue and I've seen the case studies for this, just by changing the name of your game, okay? So research isn't just pulling out some stats for App Annie, and I love App Annie, and I think that the work they do is fantastic. It isn't just getting some broad stats saying, for this particular game, this particular genre, I can make X. It's about diving right into it and saying, what is the name going to be? If I search for this particular keyword on these app stores, what are the games that I get up? How much money are they making? So you need to sort out your going to West strategy. And this is a particularly interesting slide from the perspective of what you're looking to achieve. I think there's an argument that says trying to break the West without big budgets and without teams in place is getting harder and harder. Does that mean then for the small to medium companies it's impossible? I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's getting extremely tough. So I think the rate of success for having your strategy to break the US and the EU increases as you go higher up this pyramid, and that involves more resources, and both in terms of time and in terms of money. So where do you start? You have to start by hiring the right talent. That's, again, a very trite thing to say. Specifically, what we mean by that. Well, I was talking to a guy last week who used to run he was one of the guys that used to run the Apple App Store. And he used to work for a publisher, for a Western publisher, before he got poached to go and work for Apple. And he described his working day. And his working day when he was a publisher, he would have no meetings booked with Apple. He would drive up and sit in a coffee shop outside the Apple HQ and then send emails saying, I've got back-to-back meetings. Anybody in there wants to have a chat about my latest games, come and see me. Sometimes he would sit there for days without any meetings whatsoever. But over time, he built up the relationships, and he was then in a situation where he would then get those meetings with the guys at Apple who were making the decisions on the games. Okay? His level of dedication to getting games, to building those relationships, was instrumental in the success of the publisher that he worked for. And so I think one has to be absolutely clear that although proficient in languages and strong knowledges and all those sort of things are all important, there's also that sort of extra percent that you have to go to really, really make a difference. And what this guy was able to say was, these are the forums that the guys who run the Apple App Stores look at to decide what games to feature. So unless you've got your buzz, unless you've got people on there talking about these particular games and how well they're doing, et cetera, you're never going to be featured, because you don't have that sort of extra something that these guys are working for. That is the sort of person that you're going to need to hire to make a difference on these stores. Localizing. And again, there's been some great discussions about this previously, and I won't go into all the details again on that because it's been covered much better than I have time to do now. But it isn't just language, it isn't just gameplay, it isn't just the genre of the game. It's to do with the way the art works, it's to do even with some of the culturally important references that may be made to work in the game. What do I mean by that? I often give this presentation the other way around, talking about taking games from the West to the East. And there can be characters in languages over in the US and Europe that have strong appeal. What do I mean by that? For example, a cheeky fox. A fox is often seen by cheeky, and if you're going to have a rascally little villain in European games, you can make the character a fox. Okay, that might not resonate so well over in the East. Okay, so I had a developer turn around to me and said, so if I'm going to sell my game in China, do I need to change all my foxes to pandas? Now, that's a trite, it's a trite, I can't turn around and say, yes, that's what you need to do, because that's a trite response, but it's not wrong. So what you have to look at in terms of your game isn't just the language, isn't just the genre, isn't just the gameplay, isn't just the art. Have a look at the things that are being culturally referenced within it and make sure that they resonate. And I had another guy who was looking at taking a game based on Asterix the Gaul over. Asterix isn't something that necessarily resonates in territories outside of Europe. So we have to be very, very careful to make sure that what we're not trying to sell is meaningless. Once you have decided on the right team, once you have decided that you know what you're doing in terms of your game, then you have to test. And again, there's been lots of conversations about testing and about analytics so far, and I won't go over those again. What I would say is make sure that you have the right KPIs. KPIs differ from territory to territory, and make sure that the KPIs that you're measuring for your go-to-West strategy are not the same KPIs that you would have based in your home territories, because there'll be different signals for success. Again, the relationships that you build and the people that you hire should be able to give you guidance on those, but it's very, very important. Cost of user acquisition, lifetime user value, they're different. And then in terms of once you actually are doing it, make sure you build the relationships. Those relationships can be with mobile ad networks, like AppFlood. They can be with game publishers, distributors, localization agencies, PR companies. The most success I've seen in terms of building relationships have been people planning a roadshow. They'll do 2 weeks. They'll come out to Europe. They'll meet carriers. They'll meet publishers. They'll meet PR agencies. They'll do it all in 2 weeks. And at the end, they'll hire somebody that they met in that 2-week period. And again, that's one of the best ways, I think, of actually making sure you get the right person and build these relationships, is to set yourself a roadshow and then poach somebody who you met on that roadshow. And then once you've launched your game, scale it. Again, I can't overstress, what we're seeing is a winner-takes-all strategy. The mid-market isn't profitable or tends not to be profitable. So you have to make sure that once you've got the game and it's out there, that you can really pour petrol onto that fire. That's in terms of advertising budgets, and Chartboost and AppFlood can help you with that. That's in terms of the referral programs. That's in terms of your community management. I said all of those sorts of things, so that once it's working, you scale. Because without that scale, it won't work. And in terms of how we can help, as I mentioned before, we are a mobile ad network. We cover both the Western and the Eastern markets, and we've just launched our Chinese RTB solution. So if you're looking for help in scaling in terms of acquiring users, come and talk to me afterwards. And that's it. Thank you very much.
You mentioned a couple of examples of Asian developers being successful in the West. What were the key elements on those games, from your point of view?
I think it's a great question, and I think one of the key elements were avoiding the mistakes that we actually saw in the previous presentation. And not assuming that a particular genre of game that has done very well in area A will then translate. We know from our experiences over in the West, there are particular types of game that do very well. Don't think you can change consumers to like something else. They know what they like. We see what's in the charts. You have to use that recipe as a turning around and saying, okay, I'm going to do something totally different, which is going to blow these guys away. They know what they like.
Cool. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you guys.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.